Hey everybody, this is Brian from Executive Travel. Welcome to Travel Tech in 20. Travel Tech in 20, as most of you know, is a 20-minute technology briefing to keep those within the travel industry up to date on all the different products and services that could disrupt the industry, evolve the industry, and most importantly, the ones that can improve your program. Before we start, I'd like to remind everybody that your information is confidential, won't be shared with the presenter unless you ask for it to. If you have any questions or would like to schedule a demo after the presentation, you'll be provided with the contact information of International SOS. If you would like for Executive Travel to set up the meeting, please indicate that on the post-webinar survey. Email me, email Corey, or your client solutions representative. We'll be glad to set up that meeting with you. And finally, this presentation will be recorded and sent to everybody along with the presentation deck. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Hugh. Hugh Longmore has been with the International SOS since 2015. He has an extensive background in military and defense, and to top that off, Hugh can speak English, French, and Spanish fluently, along with the basics for Arabic, German, and Italian. So that combination is perfect and makes Hugh the perfect person to be leading our discussion today on duty of care and International SOS. So without further ado, Hugh, I will hand it off to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Brian. That's a very kind introduction. What we want to do today is to give you an overview of our hotel security program. So we're essentially looking at the technology and the services that we've developed to help organizations navigate what is or what is not a secure hotel. But before we get into the products, what I wanted to start off with is a little bit of a context of why we've developed these services. So International SOS has been helping clients navigate security overseas since 1998, and during that time we've built up a lot of expertise in what travelers and expats need to be looking for in order to find a secure location. But there have been a large number of key incidents during that time that have really focused on what is required around a secure hotel, and some of the and has given us some experience of actually dealing with live situations as well. So starting off with Jakarta in 2003, moving through to the high-profile attacks in Mumbai and Islamabad, across the world, but significantly in Asia Pacific and the Middle East and Africa as well. We've seen a large number of hotels that have been focused, hotel attacks that have been focused on expats and international travelers. I think during about the same period as well, we saw a shift in our market and what clients were looking at us for. And it was moving away from a reactive posture and really about trying to give people information and advice before an incident happens in order to try and mitigate a client's exposure to that kind of incident. And where this really came across was during the spate of attacks that happened really in North Africa and the Middle East and West Africa during the 2015 to 2017 period. Following on from these calls, these attacks, we received a huge number of calls from clients asking us about hotel security and trying to identify hotels in those countries that have been affected where we thought the hotel's security was best and where there were government forces on standby that could help mitigate the risk of an attack, or at least provide some kind of hard protection that would act as a deterrent against an attack. So that really drove a change in the way that we started evaluating hotels. Beforehand, security had always been one component of what we were looking for, but we were also looking at things like how able is a hotel to accommodate a large number of people who require an evacuation. So we were looking at the accommodation and logistics. They were almost the main drivers. What we really needed to do was focus on how we were assessing hotels in their ability to provide security on a routine basis for day-to-day travel. Sorry, one final one that I'll just mention on that slide is obviously the Kenya attack earlier this year, a real key one in helping drive some of our service as well, and I'll explain why later. So what's the change? What have we seen? Well, it's not just about the attacks that have been happening, it's also about the kind of travel that businesses are doing. So we've seen an increase through our travel data, we've seen an increase of travelers that are going to medium, high and extreme risk destinations, the kind of places where these incidents happen. So if you can imagine places like Mali, Cote d'Ivoire, Tunisia, really good examples of medium risk destinations which have been hit by some of these high profile attacks. There's definitely been an increase in the number of travelers going to some of those extreme risk destinations. We had Somalia on the list a little bit earlier, and we rate that as extreme. But only about 20% of our clients are doing any kind of safety and security check on the hotels. The real thing that is driving our clients' choice of hotels is much more around large group bookings through the international chains, or looking at the financial implications. And while both of those are important, I think organizations need some way of being able to build in safety and security as well. So what are we doing about this? How are we changing our processes and operations in order to give a service that our clients are going to use? Well, the first step is that we look at the travel risk rating for the destination country. So this is something that we review on an ongoing basis. Every year we'll publish our international risk maps that give a high level view of the level of risk in all the countries that we cover around the world. We currently have about 220 countries and territories and about 400 cities on our risk map. We then look at the local hotel. So what is happening at that hotel in terms of the level of security? What kind of checks are they implementing? And do they meet the predominant threats in that local vicinity? So what I mean by that is that in Mexico, for example, which we rate as a medium risk destination, the threats are going to be different to those in somewhere like Tunisia. Mexico has a much higher rate of criminal activity, of cartel activity, whereas in Tunisia, we're really looking at the terrorist threats. And then the final thing is we need to understand, what is the company and traveler profile like? Is this a very low risk traveler who is able to speak the local languages and blend in like a local? Or is this somebody who is a VIP, maybe a senior executive, who requires an additional level of support and an additional level of security around them as an individual? So I mentioned the travel risk rating. This gives you an idea of how we break down not only countries, but even regions within countries by levels of risk. So you can see India is a really good example where it's got a high risk region over in the east. Pakistan has an extreme risk region down on the Afghan and Iranian border. The things that we're really the categories of risk that we're assessing in order to come to these risk ratings are political violence and terrorism, social unrest. So really trying to understand the political and economic drivers behind that might create rioting, protest activity, strikes and that kind of thing. Crime that I've already mentioned. And we also try to make an assessment of the effectiveness of the local security forces. Are they able to mitigate those threats? This was a question that we had a lot really from clients during that period of sort of 2015, 2016, when there was a spate of terrorist attacks in Western Europe. People were asking us, why hadn't we raised the risk rating for Paris, Brussels or London, for example? And a lot of that was down to the capability of the security services in those countries being able to mitigate the risk. And then the final thing is natural disasters. I'm sitting in Houston at the moment, which is going to go under a little bit of flooding. We look at how a building or how a hotel is able to withstand and provide some sort of resilience to travelers against that kind of issue as well. And the natural disasters are factored into our risk ratings. So when it comes to the hotel information, these are some of the things that we're looking at. The first thing is, what kind of hotel is it? Sometimes it might be advisable in one of those high-risk destinations in West Africa, for example, to pick something like a low-profile, secure compound type accommodation, rather than something like one of the large chains, which all of the locals know about and is known for hosting international travelers. We'll take a look at the perimeter. Does it have a secure standoff against main main roads, for example, to protect against vehicle explosive devices and that kind of thing. What sort of surveillance is going on at the hotel? Do they have cameras? Do they have ideally security staff, especially if it's a higher risk destination or where there's an element of criminal activity? Do they have security staff who are on call, maybe in the lobby, maybe patrolling some of the corridors to make sure that there's nothing untoward going on within the hotel? Access control is really important, and this is something that varies a lot between hotels, as I'm sure you've all seen in the past. Sometimes you can go pretty much straight from street level up into the accommodation floors, but in other parts of the world there might be really strict access control. I've seen this in a really good example in Nigeria, where you can only get into the corridor where your room is if you've got a specific key access card to get into one of the rooms on that corridor. So really tight levels of control. As for the room security, this is where we're really building that bubble around a traveller, and there are a number of components that we're looking here, and most international chains will be meeting this kind of standard. So the first thing is the door. Is it a good solid fire door that can give protection both against sort of criminal entry, but also against the fire? It should have ideally a spyglass in it, so the traveller can see out into the corridor, check the identity of anyone who's knocking on the door. It should have a deadbolt, so a way of completely securing the door from the inside. And the final thing really is that it should have an automatic closing and locking system. So if you let the door go, it'll just swing through, the spring will be enough to close the door and lock the door behind you. Then moving into the room, we'd look at things like the security of any doors, balconies. Are there any low roofs nearby that might allow criminals to get through? And I'd say the final thing, and this is really important, is there a house phone? Do you have a means of communicating down to reception? So if you do get somebody who is knocking on the door, you can ask somebody from the hotel staff to come up and check on their identity. Now, the final thing is around preparation and planning. And what's really interesting about this part is that I think that the hotels that are typically very good at preparation and planning are those that have issues that they need to plan for. So that might be hotels that have to withstand storms, hurricanes, earthquakes, and that kind of thing. Or it might be a hotel in a part of the world that goes through civil unrest and that kind of disruption. So there's a particularly good hotel that we have in Central African Republic that we've been out to assess. We know, because we've been working with them for a number of years, that they can sustain guests for about a week with food, water, electricity, air conditioning, and everything else. They can keep people on site, and it's probably the best place in the country to be if there's an outbreak of fighting in the vicinity. So these are some of the things that we're looking at in the immediate area. So I mentioned social unrest, how much criminal activity is going on in the area. So does that mean that we should be advising clients not to walk out after dark, for example? Are there any other high profile targets nearby, high profile targets, either in terms of terrorist targets, but it might be something like a government building which attracts protesters? What's the history of terrorist related incidents in the area, and what is the likelihood or potential impact of natural disasters on that particular property? And then this really brings us through to the solutions that we provide to clients. And I'd say the first step really is giving people training. So they've got that awareness of what it is that they should be looking for, how to respond if there is an incident, and the kind of services that they can rely on in a hotel. Because really the hotel, it's kind of that local business continuity for an individual traveler. That's what's going to sustain them and ideally keep the trip going along the lines that it should be going on. And we can deliver traveler training through e-learning, through remote sessions, or even in person. The next one is a hotel risk review. Occasionally, clients will come to us and say that they are setting up operations in a new country. They've identified a hotel that they want to use, and then they've asked us to provide a specific review looking at the level of security at that property, and just to confirm that is up to purpose. So we'll normally do this as a desktop task. We'll take a look at the previous incident information around that location, maybe even call out to the hotel and provide a document, normally about 15 pages or so, which gives the security manager, the client security manager, a brief on that location and confirms that it's the right place to be using. Some of that can clearly be used as well as local support for the individual traveller. And then the final piece is our hotel security advisor system. It's a little bit more than this now. We currently have about 1,600 hotels which we have assessed worldwide, and we're continually adding to this database. And it's really trying to give clients a good option in major cities around the world. The way that we do this is we look at our travel tracker data. So we have a look at where our clients are staying around the world, and we use that as a driving force really to reinforce that they're making the right decisions. So the vast majority of hotels that we look at, we actually end up recommending, because we don't want to come up with false answers. We want to make sure that we have a good, strong list that people can call on. So we'll normally go from a position of looking at hotels which we think are going to make the mark before making a full assessment. And then this is how we convey that information. Our clients can get access into this system, and they take a look at it, and it just gives them a very simple answer of, is this accommodation recommended or not? If they want more data, they can call into our security center and get a bit more idea of how that hotel has fared against the methodology that we use. So that concludes my part of the presentation. I'm going to open it up now for questions, and I think Brian is going to help manage that and pass some questions to me.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much for that, Hugh. And I did have one individual who mentioned that they felt like the audio was cutting in and out. If that's the case, we apologize. Hugh is in the middle of Houston right now with all the flooding, so that may be the issue. However, I will make sure on the recording that we do that the audio came through clear. So I do have one question here already. But I do want to let everyone know, if you have a question on the right-hand side, there's that question bar right there. Please go ahead and submit them in there to me. The first question I have is from Aaron, and it says, what is the best way to know if a hotel has an emergency operation plan?
That's a very good question, and that's something, as I kind of mentioned here, it's something that we're looking for when we do our assessment of our hotels. It's something that I do occasionally when I'm traveling. If I'm going to a new destination, I'll be asked by our security team to do one of these assessments. And that will normally include some sort of input from the hotel. So we'll either speak to the general manager, maybe head of security, that kind of person. And we're looking at trying to give that hotel a sustainability rating. So normally that's something like 72 hours, 96 hours, maybe out to several days or so, of what are the capabilities that they have when they can pretty much lock down, not accept any more guests, and sustain the people that they already have in their hotels. Now that, like I said, that varies hugely from property to property. If you're staying in a hotel in central St. Louis or somewhere like that, somewhere where there's not a great risk from terrorism, civil unrest, or natural disaster, then their sustainability rating you wouldn't expect to be as high as somewhere on the Gulf Coast of Mexico, for example, where they are always taking in fairly long-term guests, people that are staying for a couple of weeks perhaps, and who are exposed to things like earthquake and hurricanes.
All right, we have time for one more quick question here. And I have one from Bill that asks, is this only an international product, or is this domestic as well?
Yeah, absolutely.
I believe what that's asking is, in the U.S., do you do the same security ratings?
Yeah, so we give that same rating of recommended or not recommended for properties, but we might use slightly different criteria. And I've got a couple of examples in mind where we've done this. So I do. I've added hotels to our database in Austin, Chicago, Houston, Dallas, and the various other places that I tend to be traveling to. What we're looking at there is not always, and this goes back to my point of where do we recommend. It's not always about is there a level of security of property, but is it the best option for that particular area? So I can give you two examples here. There's one hotel that we have in downtown Vienna. Now, Vienna in Austria, Vienna is a very safe city, but there's one particular property where we don't recommend it. Not really that there's any particular issue with that building or the way that it's being run, but it's in a slightly higher crime neighborhood, and there are probably better options that you can pick very close by in Vienna. Likewise, there was one in Chicago that I took a look at. Part of an international chain. I would say security is being run as well as it could be, but in that particular property, you go into one building to check in, and then you walk across a car park to get into a sort of slightly isolated set of buildings around the outside. And my feeling with that was that that's not as secure as we'd like it. It's not as good an option as having a secure entry point with people going up to their rooms from there. So we just chose not to recommend that one.
Sounds good. Well, we are actually out of time. Kathy, I see your question. I will ask Hugh for you and get that answer right out to you. But that's going to conclude today's Travel Tech in 20. Thank you all for coming out. We know you all have a busy day, and so coming to join us means a lot. I'd like to thank Hugh and International SOS for presenting and showing us their products and services and how it can change the way your program works today. A couple quick reminders before we end this. First, tomorrow you'll be receiving an email that will have both the recorded presentation and the PowerPoint presentation so that you can take a look when it's convenient for you. And if you'd like to schedule a demo after that, feel free to let us know or reach out to Hugh and his team. If you have any further questions, again, reach out to Hugh, myself, Corey, or your Client Solutions representative. And lastly, we only have 2 more Travel Tech in 20s this year. We're going to take December off. Trip Kicks will be with us on October 10th, and Spot Hero will be with us on November 7th. So you can always visit our website at executivetravel.com. Go to the Travel Tech in 20 page to see all of our previous Travel Tech in 20s, sign up for any future ones, and make sure that your company is up to date on all your solutions and needs. So thank you very much, and I hope everybody has a fantastic day.
Thanks very much, Brian.